Last week's deportation of the pretender to the presidential palace in Venezuela, Juan Gauido, who was appointed president of that country by Trump's national security advisor John Bolton, appeared to signal an end of his utility to Washington. However, it appears, in fact, that he still has some value, and he's been busy in Washington demonstrating exactly how much. Camila Escalante, who covers Latin American affairs for Press TV, among other news outlets, has more. Camila, thanks for joining us. So fill us in.
Okay, well, the United States, through its Office of Foreign Assets Control, which is what they say is a financial intelligence and enforcement agency of the U.S. Treasury Department, is participating once again in the robbery of assets of the Venezuelan people, the Venezuelan state. They're robbing an entire state company once again, Citgo, a subsidiary of PDVSA, the state oil company. Of course, the Citgo Corporation has been sanctioned since 2019, and they're handing assets once again to U.S. allied figures of the Venezuelan opposition associated with the former National Assembly of Venezuela of 2015. This is the National Assembly that was elected and took office, but their mandate already ended in 2021 when parliamentary elections were held in Venezuela and a new set of elected lawmakers took office in January of 2022. So these are no longer officials of the Venezuelan National Assembly, nor are they the people who should have been responsible to begin with, because they're not part of, the Venezuelan executive or the appointed ministers or anything like that. And so, bearing in mind that Guaido is now in Washington, he had fled to Miami last week, as we spoke about last week. And so the Venezuelan government says that this is pure and simply organized crime. This is a transnational crime mafia involving Guaido, involving the U.S. government authorities and other figures linked to this opposition cartel. And so we heard not long ago from Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who said that the government of the United States is now trying to play victim. They're saying that these decisions regarding the Venezuelan people's assets are actually being made neutrally by the courts in the United States. But in reality, we know how the court and the court justices are being appointed, and that there's no real separation of powers or anything like that. And so, Delcy Rodriguez, vice president of Venezuela, says this should be a message to the world that no assets of any foreign country are safe within the territory of the United States. She says, look at how shamelessly they have robbed 33 million Venezuelans of the state companies.
They've already stolen billions and billions from Venezuela, from the people of Venezuela, also from the people of Libya, also from God knows how many other places.
Precisely, but she says this one is the robbery of the century. That's what she's calling it. She says that the Venezuelan government is not going to recognize any agreement with creditors where it is not validly directed by the Venezuelan state. None of it has any legitimacy whatsoever. And so the Venezuelan Anti-Blockade Observatory, this is an observatory that was launched probably last year. They're now updating the number of sanctions or unilateral coercive measures against Venezuela to 930. That's 930 totally illegal sanctions have been imposed by the United States on Venezuela, now incorporating this new mass robbery. So we're on track to 1,000 sanctions. This is one of the most sanctions countries of the world. And so, President Nicolas Maduro spoke on International Workers' Day on May 1st, this big rally with thousands of Chavistas in the streets of Caracas there. And he said that this decision by Biden's administration constitutes a shameless theft of the Venezuelan nation. And it's a blow to the dialogue process that was going on previously in Mexico between this far-right opposition of Venezuela and the Venezuelan government. And it's also a blow to this meeting that just took place in Bogota that was convened by Petro, where most of the participants of the 20 countries that participated, and they, talked about Venezuela and a path towards peace and dialogue, they actually called for the lifting of sanctions against Venezuela by the United States. Most of the countries agreed with that. And they say if they're continuing to, impose additional sanctions and participate in more theft of the nation, then there's no way we're going back to the table, because the demand is simply the total lifting of all sanctions, not the continued robbery of sanctions by this mafia cartel.
So we had Juan Guaido appointed president by John Bolton, I think, and Mike Pompeo. okay, he was in Venezuela for a while. He couldn't go to the pizza parlor or whatever without everyone in the place turning on him. He wasn't exactly governing. He wasn't residing in the presidential palace or any of these things. Now he flees the country, and he's in Washington signing checks. I mean, I'm wondering why it is that, for example, after Viktor Yanukovych was driven out of Kiev, with people chasing him to murder him, why he wasn't able to govern and be recognized as the president, because he was, after all, elected president of Ukraine, and Guaido is still transferring Venezuelan assets.
This is precisely the strangest part of it all, is that you had people like Nancy Pelosi and other top U.S. officials or people within the Biden government that don't even remember who Juan Guaido is when asked by reporters. And yet, despite that, so many people have made fun of him, including the U.S. media, and have said this has been a complete failure or attempt to try to change the government and oust the elected government of Nicolas Maduro, that they're now trying to actually revive this figure, it seems. He was received yesterday by Luis Almagro, the Secretary General of the OAS. And so it seems that now that he's back in the United States, that they're going to try to use him. I don't know if they're going to have any luck in trying to insert him as some sort of candidate in the next elections in Venezuela, or what they'll do in that sense, but they're going to use him to continue this sustained campaign of aggression and imposing sanctions on the country, even though so many people, including from Republicans from the Senate and Congress, have been extremely regretful of the actions by, like you said, Mike Pompeo and Trump during that administration, and even now the continuation of these totally failed policies that, if anything, Venezuela has moved closer now to many of, the U.S. adversaries, and are looking for a way out, and have been recovering steadily for the last 2 years from this disaster that was completely injected artificially from the exterior.
I mean, we're seeing in Cuba, for example, some difficulties with fuel that are consequence not only of the sanctions against Cuba, but of the sanctions against Venezuela and Iran. And I'm just wondering, what's the buzz? Let's say from Brazil, for example, where you're usually situate, about this whole sanctions picture, at this point in time.
Well, the foreign minister of Brazil, Mauro Vieira, just like Celso Amorim, the top advisor to Lula, have said that these are simply not valid sanctions. We don't recognize them. They're illegal under international law, as well as according to the Brazilian constitution. And that's how many people see it. They are rebuilding relations with Venezuela. Actually, the president-elect that most people have already recognized, most presidents around the world, of Paraguay, that those elections were held on Sunday, is from the ruling Conservative Party. He is from the right wing, and he won the election, and it was actually his government which decided to break relations with Venezuela in 2019 and supposedly recognize Guaido. This newly elected conservative guy says that he's going to be mending relations with Venezuela. People are just so over that Lima cartel period. And so, they're looking for ways to recover these economies. Cuba is looking to China, Iran, and Russia for help in trying to mitigate some of the issues that are a result of this 60-year plus campaign of aggression against the country. Obviously, it's going through a very difficult time, but I have seen the ways in which they're looking for solutions towards sustainable agriculture, towards dealing with the fuel problems, and everything else.
All right, Camila, thank you so much. We'll speak with you again, and perhaps Stephen, too, next week.
Thanks for having me.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.